Pinkertons Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Outre Terre. It is not intended for children.
I sat in a windowless room, drumming my fingers, waiting for my lawyer to show up. It had been a strange day. I had been sitting at home at the end of the day, pretty much just minding my own business when there was a knock on my door. When I went to answer it, 2 cops were standing there. I blinked. "Can I help you?" "Are you Sean Russo?" "Yes. Is there some sort of problem?" "We have a warrant for your arrest, Mr. Russo. You're being charged with murder." After much confusion and arguing and demanding to see the warrant, which was in fact legit, I was trundled up into a cop car and brought over to the station, where I was informed that there was photographic evidence of a murder committed by me. Obviously, I refused to speak and called for a lawyer. I considered making a call to Kitten Sandevay, but he was really meant to deal with the Fae and supernatural cases, not mundane cops. Besides, I've seen some of his cases besides the one in the Molly Maguire's case. It would sort of be like bringing in a howitzer to blow away a couple of guys with blow darts. While I waited, the cops showed me some strange things, trying to crack me. There were definitely photos, all right, and they were definitely of me or someone who looked a hell of a lot like me. But something was off. The me in the pictures was holding a dagger embedded in a body. Worse is that the body, an old man, was undoubtedly alive in the first photo, though by the second and third he was clearly dead. There was no doubt about it. The figure in the picture was committing a murder. But something about the murderer in the photo didn't look quite right. He looked like me, sure, and even had an eye patch. But when I looked closely, I could see lines under his eyes and flecks of gray in his hair and chin stubble. Whoever this guy was, he was older than me. Or at least he looked it. After a few minutes, there was a knock on the door. The 2 cops who were sitting in detention with me looked at each other before getting up to answer. Standing at the door was a slightly, but not overly, stocky man in a black suit. He was balding and shorter than me, and I was not tall. He wore a red tie. The cops seemed to recognize him, so I assumed he was some pencil-pushing higher-up suit in the department. "Thank you for your work, officers. I'll take it from here." The 2 cops looked at each other again, then shrugged. "If you say so, sir." They gave me a dirty look as they moved off to the side, but stayed there, glaring at me. I ignored them as the suit sat in front of me. "Mr. Russo, my name is Chief Inspector Johnson. I know you're waiting on a lawyer, but there are some things you'd probably like to know first. We have witnesses to the crime." I had my head down as he spoke. When he mentioned witnesses, I looked at his face. He had the sort of face that made you forget what it looked like as soon as he looked away. In fact, it felt like the first time I'd seen it, even though we'd just entered the room. I looked down again. Lawyer. All right, but for your information, there are 3 witnesses, 2 the prosecution will probably consider highly reliable. You're in hot water, Mr. Russo. Is there nothing you want to say before you lawyer up? I looked at Johnson's face again, and again it was like I was seeing him for the first time. I squinted at him. "You're not a police detective." Johnson played his cards close to his chest. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean." "Your face. Every time I look away, I forget what you look like. You're a member of the Security Commission, aren't you? Guy like you showed up during the Control Rescue mission. He had the same power as you. Every time I looked away, I forgot what his face looked like. What's your angle here?" The other 2 cops in the room looked back and forth between me and the chief. "What garbage is this? He's worked here for years." Johnson cut the cop off. "Gentlemen, please leave the room for now." "But you've done a fine job, but I need to speak with Mr. Russo alone." There was a pause before one of the cops shrugged. "It's your paperwork, sir." They walked out of the room, leaving Johnson and me alone. Johnson stared at me. "That was unwise." I laughed mirthlessly. "Unwise, like trusting Masons to work for the commission. Jack has been finding a lot of, embarrassing hiring practices. What's your angle here? I thought that might get a reaction. It didn't. Johnson was a rock. I didn't arrest you. I'm here to get you out. Sorry about the charade. I was waiting for the opportune moment to clear the room, but you worked out my identity. He checked his watch. 6 minutes and 42 seconds early. Yeah, that's me, always the first one at the party. Now, are you going to tell me what's really going on? Johnson sat down at the chair across from me. Very well. How familiar are you with the role of the Security Commission, Detective Russo? I know you guys respond to supernatural threats, sort of like the Pinkertons. Johnson gave a very slight cough. It annoyed me for some reason. Not precisely. We respond to severe supernatural threats, Detective Russo. It was unconscious, but I think that was when I decided I didn't particularly like Johnson. Severe. I see. Is there any reason you're talking to a lowly paranormal Pinkerton? If Johnson caught my sarcasm, he didn't react to it. First, your deduction is correct. My name is Agent Johnson. I'm part of the Security Commission's field team. And yes, as it so happens, there is a reason we need to speak with you. Several incidents have been occurring recently, and they center around you, Detective Russo. So that's why they needed me. I folded my arms. You have my attention. Excellent. As it happens, Detective, I may be able to help you answer some questions. First, you tell me, what did you see in those pictures? I thought for a second. Well, I saw me, but older, I guess. Exactly. Detective Russo, I am here to tell you that is exactly who you saw. I tried and failed to connect the dots. What is that supposed to mean? You're clearly an intelligent man, Detective Russo. Are you aware of the concept of the multiverse? Multiverse? Multiverse is science fiction stuff. Agent Johnson didn't change his facial expression. Detective Russo, surely by now you understand that the boundary between fact and fiction is much looser than many realize. I thought about my experiences over the past few years and conceded the point. Okay, multiverses, so like parallel universes. That's a simplified version of the concept, yes. The Security Commission monitors parallel universes for potential apocalyptic scenarios. This allows us to react if events in our universe start to match the timelines of a parallel reaching an apocalyptic event. I snorted. Considering the state of the world, I don't think you've been entirely successful. That's where you're wrong, Detective. The very fact that you are around to consider the state of the world means that we have been very successful indeed. For the first time, I started to understand the scale of what he was talking about. Okay, so what's all of this have to do with me? Come on, Detective. Haven't you put it together yet? Where do you think the man in the photos came from? It hit me like a thunderclap, and I felt the blood drain from my face. You mean this person is you, Detective? Or rather, this is an alternate version of you from another timeline. There are various differences, but what you need to understand is that his world ended. Ended. That's right. His universe suffered a Class 1 apocalyptic event. I am not permitted by my superiors to give all details, but we believe it involved an occult incident. I was starting to get dizzy. Like opening a portal into hell? Oh, not precisely, but the stakes are similarly high. I took a deep breath. Okay. So how did I get involved in this? Agent Johnson hesitated for a fraction of a second before saying, I'm not at liberty to tell you. I gave a grin. You don't know, do you? As I said, I'm not at liberty to tell you. And why do you need me for this mission? When doppelgangers from parallel universes end up in the same universe, they tend to attract each other. We have good reason to believe your doppelganger will be present, but you being there as well will virtually guarantee it. Now, I'll be honest, this struck me as patronizing. I had single-handedly taken down a whirling Wimpus. I'd gone up against mind-controlling vampires and witches and come out on top more than once. Heck, I once traveled back in time and saved America. And this short, balding, middle-aged manlet was going to use me for bait? Not likely. Come on, give me a roll. I can handle myself. To my surprise, Agent Johnson didn't object. You're welcome to act as you see fit. Events are, prepared, whatever you do or don't do. Please try not to kill your doppelganger if possible. I nodded, though I had no idea how I was supposed to avoid it. All right. Agent Johnson checked his watch and smiled. There we go. The portal should be ready by now. I gave him a quizzical look, but he pointed at the brick wall behind me. To my surprise, a black oval had appeared, soundlessly, an elongated circle of swirling black shadow, long enough for us to fit through. Agent Johnson gestured to it. After you. I turned to leave, then hesitated. What have the cops been seeing this whole time? Oh, nothing suspicious, I assure you. Will my ring turn this portal thing off? Agent Johnson smiled slightly, as if remembering an inside joke. Your ring has been taken into account. Please refrain from touching the edges of the portal. Where does it lead? He checked his clock. A graveyard in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Old Chestnut Level Cemetery. Do you know why he's there? The Security Commission has several theories. I squinted at Agent Johnson. Any you're willing to share with me? No. And that was that. No time like the present. See you on the other side, I guess, Agent Johnson. I stepped through the swirling portal. There was a brief moment of blackness before I ended up in the graveyard. It looked like a graveyard. Very stereotypical. There were, I noticed, some extremely old graves and what I think was a church building somewhere in the background, looming over the whole place like a guardian. But it was well organized and neatly kept. It was late and even darker than normal. The wind was howling badly, and the storm clouds blanketing the sky had a ghoulish green tint to them. It made the whole place look gangrenous. A storm was coming, potentially a bad one. A second later, an Agent Johnson joined me. I turned to him. Now what? Agent Johnson handed me my gun. I wasn't surprised he had it. Now, we wait. Over the low thunder and the rain, I heard the unmistakable sound of a shovel and dirt. I saw light shining from a tripod into a pit. Dirt flew and a man stood, cracked his back, and wiped rain from his face. The person in the distance was digging into an occupied grave, a despicable desecration of the sacred. I snorted. Not likely. I'm going in. I expected Agent Johnson to stop me, but he merely nodded. Feel free to act as you see fit. You've already played your most important part, just remember. If possible, don't kill him. Got it. Apprehend, don't kill. Yes, and one more thing, Detective Russo. What's that? Be careful. I nodded grimly. I'm a professional. I'm always careful. This was not strictly true, but Agent Johnson didn't need to know all of the sordid details. I approached the gravedigger as cautiously as the mud allowed. He seemed to be very caught up in his work, and despite the fact that it was very nearly pitch black thanks to the night and cloud cover, he wore a fedora hat that helped to cover his face as he bent low. I decided the straightforward approach was best. The ring of dispel meant he couldn't cast any spells on me, and if I got the jump on him with the gun, that was that. No need to wait for whatever Agent Johnson was expecting. I kept the light to my back so it would shine to his eyes. When I was maybe 10 feet away, I held up the gun. This is Paranormal Pinkerton Detective Sean Russo. I need you to drop everything and hold up your hands and turn to me, real slow-like. You're needed for questioning. The gravedigger paused what he was doing, but did not turn. Sean Russo, you say? Funny. I guess it's not that uncommon of a name, all things considered. Though I was expecting it, it was still an extremely eerie experience hearing my voice coming from somebody else's mouth. Perhaps very slightly deeper, a touch gravelier, but unmistakably me. I was thinking the same thing. This universe wasn't meant to hold two of us. You think there are only two of us? He sounded amused for a moment. That caught me off guard. What's that supposed to mean? For the first time, my doppelganger looked at me. It was like looking into a mirror. Almost. He even had a patch over the same eye. But there were lines on his face that weren't on mine, and the stubble on his beard had flecks of gray. He could have had 20 or 30 years on me, or just 10. He looked like he had lived enough for 30. There was something else, too. His eye was utterly soulless. This was the same look you sometimes see on serial killers, and seeing it on my face scared me. Never mind. You get one warning. Leave me alone. Though I was the one in the position to be making threats, he spoke with utter conviction. I held my ground regardless. I notice you and I are wearing the same ring. There's no magic you can use on me. That's true, but I don't need to use magic on you. Red lightning flashed across the sky, distracting me. With a sudden crack, a hand shot out of the mud and gripped my leg. I screamed in shock and wrenched it back, ripping the skeletal hand off. The rest of the body rose from the grave with it and stumbled towards me, flesh falling off. Heard the laughter of my doppelganger in the background as he watched the chaos. I panicked. When you see a body rise from the grave, you react before you think, however brave you think you are. I pumped lead into that corpse, and the bones cracked and collapsed onto the ground as it stumbled towards me. Before I could breathe a sigh of relief, another hand shot up, nearly grabbing me. Then another. Then another. To my horror, the entire graveyard was filled with the horrible sight of rising corpses and the sound of cracking stone and earth, and the teeth-grinding squelch of mud as tombs opened and the ground opened up. I could only see what my doppelganger's light shone on. I heard the rest. I was rational enough to wonder briefly if my doppelganger found some way to shield this visually from the outside world, but that was about all of the space my brain had for rationality. I had already run out of bullets. The doppelganger wasn't priority 1, 2, or 3 anymore. Now the priority was escape. But how, when the entire graveyard was full of shambling, rotting corpses, all targeting me? The lightning flashed again. I was in the middle of it. I ran, slipping and stumbling on the broken earth, dodging rising hands, using my gun to pistol whip the corpses. This was an ancient graveyard. They had no strength to them. Each blow shattered their bones. It was obvious quickly that there was no escape. Despite my best efforts, a corpse that wasn't completely rotting away managed to grab me and tug at my legs, followed by another, then another. I felt them tear at me, but they couldn't rip my flesh. They reached for my mouth and eyes. Slowly, the corpses piled on top of me, blocking out the eerie green light of the sky and the rain as I was crushed under their weight. 12:04 a.m. About time. Agent Johnson? He hadn't run? In fact, he sounded just as calm as he had in our conversation inside the police station. What was going on? That's when I heard what sounded like low whistling. The temperature dropped precipitously, and suddenly. The wind grew stronger. One by one, the corpses covering me flew off, torn away from me by the force of the wind. I stayed down on the ground and watched flat on my stomach. A tornado formed in front of me. And not just the tornado, the whole thunderstorm seemed to be centered right on top of the graveyard. It grew stronger and stronger. Standing off to the side, watching with an almost clinical interest, was Agent Johnson. My doppelganger was caught up in the whirlwind. The flying corpses were no longer moving, corpses once again, and my doppelganger screamed in panic. Agent Johnson walked over to the whirlwind calmly. Sean Russo, from Parallel Universe Beta C. My name is Agent Johnson from the Security Commission. You're going to have to come with me for questioning, whether you'd like to or not. My doppelganger just kept screaming. Very good, said Agent Johnson. With extraordinary precision, the winds from the storm flung my doppelganger around the funnel in front of Agent Johnson. The commission agent stood with a coiled rope in his hand, staring down at his watch. And here we go. Without looking up, he tossed the rope into the tornado. I watched in utter disbelief as the rope tangled itself thoroughly around my doppelganger as he stayed trapped in the whirling vortex. In a moment, he was completely bound and placed on the ground in front of Agent Johnson. The storm weakened suddenly with a blast of cold air that came from the north. The tornado simply dwindled and vanished. I got to my feet cautiously. Bearing a flashlight, Agent Johnson calmly walked up to my now bound doppelganger and took the ring off his hand. The Security Commission will be taking possession of this. The doppelganger just looked at Agent Johnson with fear in his eyes. Johnson looked down at his watch and frowned. A 7-second discrepancy. I should get this recalibrated. I looked around at the graveyard. It was fine. I mean, it looked like a storm had just hit, but to my astonishment, the corpses were all back in their original locations, sinking slowly through the mud and back into the earth. They twitched, but they didn't have the strength to escape. I stared at Agent Johnson in slack-jawed amazement. You did all of this? I planned for this to happen. The cold air was making me shiver. You can summon thunderstorms. Agent Johnson looked offended. Don't be ridiculous. Nobody can reliably call in the weather unless they use occult magic. I used to work for the Clockwork Cognomen. I merely manipulated the airstreams in subtle ways so they would interact in the manner and at the time of my choosing. Nothing more. It looked an awful lot like controlling the weather to me. So what are you planning on doing with him? Well, before he could finish, a man appeared with a puff of smoke. Doves and confetti hit me in the face. A confused bird put a scratch near my good eye, and I nearly cracked my head open, shooing it away. Good show, Agent Johnson. Not your best performance, Sean Russo, but there will be more, I'm sure. This came from so out of nowhere that it took me a second to place the man, who was dressed like a stereotypical stage illusionist. Alexander the Great? He had nearly killed Violent and me on a trip to the Jersey Shore some time ago. Ah, so you do remember me. I'm afraid I have no time to reminisce, but we will meet again. Alexander the Great was on my, currently lengthening, shoot-on-sight list, and my gun was drawn before he finished his sentence. I was out of bullets. I didn't have a spare magazine. I turned to Agent Johnson, but he just looked confused. He checked his watch again. Strange, we had him registered at a children's birthday party several states away from here. I stared in disbelief. Registered? How do you even make that mistake? Why would you let him near children? Things you consider threats aren't always on the Security Commission's radar. Alexander the Great was a low-priority name. Alexander laughed at this. I'd love to stay and chat about this, but it's about time my principal audience and I were leaving. And with a dramatic flourish, he threw out streamers of cloth from somewhere inside his elaborate jacket, obscuring our view of him and the doppelganger. Lightning flashed. I couldn't tell if that was on purpose or just good timing. Johnson had drawn his own gun and fired. He moved so quickly I hadn't even seen him draw. The sound of shattering glass permeated the night sky, cutting through the lessening thunder. Shards of clear glass fell at our feet from a mirrored plane that was not there a minute ago. We watched as pieces fell out of its casing, neither of us saying anything. When the lightning flashed again, the clearing with the doppelganger and Alexander was completely empty, as if nobody had been there at all. I turned to Agent Johnson. You didn't, I don't know, have some sort of protection up? Agent Johnson hadn't moved. His head was bowed. He raised it. Detective Russo, thank you for coming with me today. I'm sorry we couldn't bring this to an acceptable outcome. I couldn't believe it. That's it. You're not going after him. Of course I am. But not now. That man was not in the plans. Got up close to Johnson. So you made a mistake. He bowed his head again. It's not one I'll make again. At his admission of fault, I felt the fight go out of me. It was admittedly taxing on the nerves to have to take on a full-scale zombie uprising single-handedly. Okay, fine. Just keep me in the loop, okay? We had already started walking back to the black portal at this point. We'll be in touch. How will I get in touch with you? And what about the police? Agent Johnson almost laughed to himself. I will be in touch with you. As for the police, you may consider them a non-issue from now on about this matter and following, similar matters. He left through the black portal. I ran through after him, but found myself directly in front of my apartment building. And that was all with Agent Johnson, for now. I haven't seen him since. This isn't over, though. I remembered what my doppelganger told me. We weren't the only two Seans in this reality. What was going on here? Why were all of these apocalyptic events hitting at once? Why are various versions of me escaping into this universe? How many are there? Was I going to discover it one day on a mission in God knows where? Just sit in a diner booth and across the way from me is me, same meal, same clothes, same face. Or would I find me like the doppelganger? What was Agent Johnson not telling me? I don't know, but I'm going to find out, whether the Security Commission decides to help me out or not. I have the feeling that this is the start of something big. Sean Russo signing off. For now.
Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio, licensed under an attribution non-commercial, share-alike international license. This episode was written by Anthony Marchetta and is performed by the same. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Kid Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on Unauthorized, Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhost, email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com, or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.